You're not afraid of being single. You're afraid of yourself. That panic when you're alone, that desperate scrolling at 2 a.m., that voice screaming you're not enough without someone. That's not loneliness. That's you running from the most important person you'll ever meet. Carl Jung spent years in complete isolation while the world told him he was broken, incomplete, less than. And in that terrifying silence, he discovered something that will change how you see every relationship for the rest of your life. Because here's what nobody tells you. The reason you can't be alone isn't because you need someone else. It's because you've never actually met yourself. You've been too busy performing, too busy swiping, too busy begging to be chosen to realize you abandoned yourself years ago. And every failed relationship, every painful breakup, every night you've cried wondering why you're not enough, it all traces back to one moment. The moment you decided you were incomplete alone. So let me ask you something terrifying. If you were single forever, no apps, no possibilities, no rescue coming, could you look in the mirror and still love what you see? Most people can't. And that's exactly why they're trapped. Most flee that question. They swipe endlessly, rush into relationships, say yes to anyone who shows interest, do anything to avoid simply being with themselves, because they fear themselves, because they have never met themselves, because they cannot exist without constant romantic validation. And therein lies the trap. The more you run from yourself, the more enslaved you become to whoever will have you. You seek constant reassurance, instant connection, premature commitment, all to escape the very emptiness you should be quietly filling. Jung never longed to escape into coupling. He sought instead to enter relationships with clarity, not desperation. And clarity is born only in solitude, in the discipline of sitting with yourself without dating apps, without fantasies of rescue, without the need to be chosen. Yet no one teaches us this. We are conditioned to seek the other half, to believe we are incomplete alone, to measure our worth by whether someone wants us. We are told that being single is temporary suffering, that you need a partner, that without romance, you are somehow less. And so we beg to be chosen instead of choosing ourselves. To learn to be alone is not to reject love. It is to encounter yourself. It is to discover within a place of wholeness, a self that does not collapse when relationships end, a foundation that does not rely on someone else's affection, desire, or promises. Because when you know how to be alone, you stop begging to be loved. You no longer settle for relationships that diminish you. You no longer cling to those who offer breadcrumbs. You no longer avoid solitude for fear of facing your own company. And in that moment, when you finally befriend yourself, the miracle happens. You are no longer incomplete. You are with yourself, which is in essence the most real and most forgotten relationship of all. Jung understood that the most powerful person is not the one who attracts everyone, but the one who can remain single and not destroy themselves in the process. Perhaps this is why you do not heal, do not grow, do not find peace. Because every time you are alone, you immediately seek the nearest relationship, the quickest distraction, the first person who shows interest. But that escape does not save you. It only delays the inevitable meeting with your most honest self. You were not born knowing how to be complete alone. You were taught to seek the other, to look outward for completion, to define yourself through romantic validation. But very rarely were you taught to look inward, to build a relationship with yourself, to become the person you keep searching for in others. That is why, when real singleness comes, you do not know what to do with it. You do not know how to hold that emptiness, how to sit with your longing without immediately trying to fill it, how to be with yourself without needing someone else to make you feel real. Jung understood that an undisciplined heart is a person's greatest enemy. That suffering comes not so much from being alone, but from what we allow to happen inside without awareness or self-love. And if you cannot be alone, you become addicted to relationships, not out of love, but out of need. And when you are with someone, instead of sharing yourself, you use them to avoid facing yourself. You do not seek true intimacy. You seek distraction from your own company. That is why so many relationships fail. Not because of a lack of love, but because they are built from emptiness. Two people who cannot be with themselves expect the other to give them what they have never cultivated within. That is not love. It is emotional dependence. And when that dependence breaks, you not only lose someone, you lose your center because you had placed it outside yourself. That is when the densest loneliness appears, the one that feels like a loss of identity, like you cannot exist without being wanted. Jung's psychology offers a powerful idea that a whole person is never truly incomplete because they carry their own universe within. And that universe is not made of romantic fantasies or the promise of someone else, but of self-knowledge, values, and presence. Learning to be alone is returning to yourself. It is asking without fear, what have I been avoiding? What inner wounds have I been trying to heal through others? What parts of myself have I abandoned in the search for someone to complete me? And when you dare to listen, at first it hurts. You hear your unworthiness, your fear of rejection, your belief that you are not enough alone. But little by little, if you do not run into another relationship, something else emerges. A calmer, wiser, firmer voice. The one that has always been there, waiting to be heard. That voice is you. Not your ego, not your romantic fantasies, not your wounds. You without adornments, without the need to be chosen. And when you finally reconnect with that voice, being single begins to transform. It is no longer punishment. It becomes companionship. Because the real problem was never being alone. It was the emptiness of self-love. It was the disconnection from your own wholeness, your own purpose, your own essence. That is where the real work begins. Not in forcing yourself to be fine with being single, not in pretending you do not long for connection, but in building a relationship with yourself so solid that your worth no longer depends on whether someone wants you. Jung wrote that within each of us lies an impregnable fortress, a self that cannot be destroyed by rejection or abandonment. But you only find it when you stop seeking outside what can only be built inside. And yes, there will be nights when being single feels unbearable. Moments when you want to reach for your phone, to message anyone, to feel wanted again. But if you stay a little longer, if you breathe and remain, you will discover that the love you seek is not in someone else, but in you. That is the difference between being single and feeling lonely. One is a circumstance, the other an interpretation. There is a freedom that only solitude can give, a freedom that does not feel like euphoria, but like calm. It is not excitement. It is a deep sigh that comes when you stop trying to be chosen. Jung found that freedom in the midst of professional pressure, social expectations, and a world that demanded he conform. But his true battle was never against external judgment. It was against his need to be validated, his fear of being alone, his impulse to abandon himself for acceptance. And if he, with all his wisdom, understood that the only real wholeness was self-possession, why do you still believe that being single means being incomplete? Society bombards you with images of perfect couples, romantic milestones, wedding announcements, but no one speaks of the value of intimacy with yourself, of that quiet night when you understand things no partner could ever teach you. When you learn to be single without feeling deficient, it is not that you no longer desire connection. It is that you no longer define yourself through it. And that completely changes how you relate. You stop demanding others to complete you. You stop settling for relationships that require you to shrink. You start sharing from wholeness, from a space within you that is full. Not to fill voids, but to expand, to celebrate, to love without losing yourself in the process. And that emotional maturity only arrives when you cross the discomfort of being alone. When instead of avoiding it, you make it your teacher, your crucible, your path to self-discovery. Because in solitude, you can see how much of what you do is performed for the hope of being wanted, and how much is the genuine expression of your essence. In that space appears a vital question. If no one were watching, would you still value yourself? If no one desired you, would you still honor who you are? If you were single forever, would you be at peace with your own company? The answers hurt, but they free you, because they show you to what extent you have been betraying yourself, postponing your wholeness out of fear of being unwanted. And once you see it clearly, you can no longer go back. You can no longer keep running into relationships to escape yourself, because you have understood that the only constant in this life is you. And if you do not cultivate that relationship, no romantic connection can last for long. Jung wrote that the soul grows stronger in the solitude of its own company, like a tree that deepens its roots in darkness. And you are no exception. You can be that strong too. You can also stand alone, but you must stop constantly seeking completion outside. You must give yourself that space. Not once when a relationship ends, not only when you feel rejected, but every day, even if only for a few minutes, even if at first it feels uncomfortable. Because every time you choose to remain with yourself, even briefly, you are repairing something inside. You are remembering who you are without romantic validation, without someone else's desire, without the need to be chosen. And little by little, what once seemed unbearable becomes familiar. And over time, it becomes your foundation. The noise of the world is constant, and many use relationships as anesthesia. They fill themselves with romance, with possibilities, with the fantasy of the one, just to avoid stopping. Because in the pause appears the question they fear most. Am I truly living my own life? Or am I just trying to become lovable? That question, simple yet unsettling, carries the weight of every compromise you have made, every boundary you have softened, every part of yourself you have hidden to be accepted. Being alone, truly alone, gives you the perfect stage to ask this, the kind you usually avoid in the distraction of dating. Solitude removes the performance, the hope of being chosen, the comfortable lies you tell yourself about why you need someone else. It places you face to face with yourself, unmasked and unadorned, and it is there, in that raw and unfiltered encounter, that the true work of individuation begins. Many people fear that mirror. They fear what it might reveal. The truth that for years, maybe decades, they have been performing not for themselves, but for the approval of potential partners. They have been bending, adjusting, shrinking, performing simply to be wanted, to be loved, to not be alone. But if you can stay long enough in front of that mirror without turning away, something extraordinary happens. The same mirror that once accused you begins to offer you a possibility. You can still choose differently. Conscious solitude is not a sentence, not a sign of failure or unworthiness. It is an open space, a sacred ground where you can plant something new. It is where you strip away the borrowed personas you have worn to attract others and meet the unaltered truth of who you are. In that silence, you are free to rebuild, not from fear of being alone, but from a place that is authentically yours. Carl Jung understood this not only as theory, but as lived necessity. He often chose solitude even when connection was possible, even when the world offered him partnership. He knew that the wholeness worth having begins within. If a person cannot be complete alone, cannot master their own fears and needs, then they have no foundation from which to truly love another. The discipline he cultivated was not cold isolation. It was a warmth, a clarity, and a peace born from no longer being enslaved to the fear of being unwanted. That inner stillness allowed him to love with freedom, to connect without desperation, to be present without losing himself. When you learn to truly inhabit yourself, you no longer depend on being chosen. You stop performing. You stop chasing validation through romance. Your presence steadies. Your boundaries clarify. Your relationships become conscious choices, not desperate needs. People notice, even if they cannot explain why. The one who does not fear being single is magnetic, not because they play games, but because they cannot be manipulated by the fear of being alone. They carry within them something unshakable, something no one else can give or take away. And from that independence, love transforms. You connect not out of desperation, but from the joy of sharing. You love without the silent bargain of complete me. You choose without the terror of being unchosen. This shift changes the very texture of intimacy. When you are not afraid of being alone, you are also not afraid to say no, to walk away from what diminishes you, to protect your wholeness. You begin to understand that returning to yourself is not loneliness. It is homecoming, and you know, without question, that you will always be there for yourself. That knowledge is rare. It is a form of power that few dare to claim. Solitude, when embraced consciously, becomes a kind of spiritual practice. It tests you, shapes you, strengthens you. Each time you survive a night of loneliness without reaching for distraction, you emerge with a deeper strength you did not know you had. Carl Jung wrote that the psyche is fortified in retreat, that wisdom emerges in stillness, and that only in the vastness within can true direction be found. That direction does not arrive from dating advice or romantic strategies. It emerges quietly from within, from the part of you that only speaks when you have the courage to listen. And in that quiet, you realize a truth that feels like coming home. You were never truly incomplete. You were simply distracted, scattered, and distant from yourself. Now, you are finally returning. You begin to see that real love is not measured by whether someone chooses you, but by the quality of your own presence with yourself. Perhaps your whole life you have been trained to see being single as waiting, as less than, as something to fix. But now you know, being alone can be the bravest and most necessary chapter of your life. In a world that glorifies coupling and measures worth by relationship status, you choose instead to stop, to breathe, to listen. Not to romantic possibilities, but to the voice you have silenced within. You listen to your heart's true desires, your soul's deepest calling, your authentic self beneath the performance. This listening, small yet profound, changes everything. When you can sit with yourself without fear, without the panic of being unwanted, without the masks you have worn to attract others, you reclaim the wholeness you once traded for validation. It is not about rejecting love or isolating yourself in bitterness. It is about building an inner foundation so solid that your peace no longer hangs on whether someone wants you. Jung believed that everything we need for a complete and meaningful life already exists within us, but to find it, we need silence, courage, and self-love. 3 things modern dating culture tries to strip away. So the next time you feel the ache of being single, resist the impulse to swipe, to reach out, to fill the void with anyone who will have you. Stay, breathe, watch what rises to the surface. Let yourself feel it without rushing to fix it. Because right there, in that discomfort, a door opens. A door to a version of yourself that does not depend on being chosen, on romantic validation, on the unpredictable tides of another's affection. On the other side of that door is freedom. And once you cross it, you can no longer go back to abandoning yourself for love. You no longer give yourself away to avoid aloneness. You no longer perform endlessly just to be wanted. You stop running because you have learned that your own company is not a prison, but a sanctuary. Learning how not to feel incomplete while single is an art. Like all art, it requires patience, practice, and devotion. It asks you to replace self-judgment with self-compassion, to speak to yourself as you would to someone you deeply cherish. There will be days when it feels easy, and days when you fall back into old patterns of seeking validation. But each time, you will return to yourself a little faster. Each time, being alone will feel less like emptiness and more like coming home. One day, without realizing it, you will notice that your favorite relationship is the one you have with yourself. Not because you have stopped desiring love, but because you no longer lose yourself in the search for it. You know that as long as you are whole within, you will never be truly incomplete. The world will keep demanding you couple up, urging you to settle, to compromise, to stop being so selective. But you will have learned something greater: the sacred power of choosing yourself, of honoring the life within you, of being complete alone. And if the noise of the world ever pulls you away again, remember, nothing out there can diminish the wholeness you have awakened. You only need to return to it, always, without fear. And perhaps, in learning to stay with yourself, you will discover the most important truth of all. You were the love you were searching for. Thank you for staying until the end. If this message resonated with you, if it touched something true within, subscribe so we can continue building this space where being alone is honored, not feared. And tell me in the comments, what is the hardest part for you about being single? And what are you learning in the process of becoming whole? Your experience might help someone who still feels incomplete.